would like to introduce Joerg Platzer today. Joerg is actually a relatively good guy. He's an old anarchist, as you can see, hat and all that. He's missing his sunglasses today. And he's actually, no, it's not working. Is it working? And he's actually famous for running Room 77, one of the first brick and mortar restaurants that accepted cryptocurrencies. Okay, it works. Now it works. And it's been something like a home for the cryptocurrency scene in Berlin. And other than having really good burgers in his restaurant, most of the time, he's also somebody who tries to explain people what Bitcoin is. And he's not very picky in whom to explain it to. He'll explain it to everybody who asks, including people like banks and the German government. Hence, his title of this talk today is Behind Enemy Lines, Part 2. Let's see what it is.
Thank you. Next time I'll, thank you for coming to my talk. It's actually a follow-up to the first talk I held at the first Hackers Congress at Parallel Polis. And that talk was also called Behind Enemy Lines. And it was about, I've been into Bitcoin pretty early in the 2010 or 11, something like that. And I all of a sudden found myself in Germany being counted as a kind of Bitcoin expert. I hate the word expert, by the way. So I found myself in situations where I was invited to explain what this whole Bitcoin thing is about, not only by banks and central banks and financial regulators and law enforcement even, also to the German government. So I found myself in this world, which is not my world as an anarchist. And I remember one moment where a member of the German parliament turned around to me and was like, Mr. Platzer, is it not so nice that people like you can become part of the lawmaking process? And there was finally the moment where I was like, no, you're getting something wrong here. So that was that talk about 4 years ago, and I thought it's maybe a good idea to reflect upon that a bit. Hence, Behind Enemy Lines, Part 2, the title of this talk. I made a few notes here. That first talk back then was really about the why and what are we talking to these people there, while this talk about why and what are we talking to the people behind enemy lines there, while this talk is rather about the enemy lines themselves. Now, the big conclusion back then was always, do they not understand? I mean, you talk to financial regulators and government people and so on, and you understand this technology, and the topics they were talking about was always like topics where you would sit down and go like, hey, for example, the discussion about should VAT be put on Bitcoin payments in Germany. I remember that discussion with some financial regulators and a member of the German parliament, and I was like, this is totally crazy. It was the day after, and this is 5-6 years ago, it was the day after I had issued the Room 77 bacon cheese coin on the counterparty protocol. So I looked at these people and I was like, I explained to them that last night I issued an internationally, a globally, anonymously tradable derivative, yes, on a bacon cheeseburger, but that's not the point what it's about. It's a proof of concept, you know. So what I'm trying to say is that these people never seem to understand the power of this new technology, Bitcoin, and they did neither understand the scope of it. They did not understand the power, because if they would have understood the power, they would not bothered for a second to think about should we put VAT on there, because if you do that in such a powerful technology with such a potential, to have a huge global success. As a jurisdiction, you literally shoot yourself in the foot. And when you're talking about, should we put VAT on there, while people already issue derivatives, securities, outside of the regulated financial system, then you obviously did not understand the scope of this technology. I did, of course, I thought, so what is it? Why don't they understand this? And came to the conclusion that you really have to have an understanding for 3 different topics in order to actually understand Bitcoin, its power, and where it's going to go. You first need an understanding of Austrian economics or money theory or sound money theory. You need that in order to know why Bitcoin even exists. You need to have, secondly, an understanding of cryptography, of asymmetric, of public key cryptography, because if you don't grasp cryptography, you cannot understand why Bitcoin even works. As long as you don't understand that, Bitcoin looks like magic, and people tend to not so believe in magic. And the third thing you need to have understood in order to know where this journey is going is you need an understanding of software development and especially the history of software development. So conclusion back then was, and I'm talking 5-6 years ago, well, they don't understand. This is beautiful, because as long as they don't understand, we can just go on developing our stuff and make it better, make it more secure, make it more private, and more anti-fragile. Hold on a sec. So back then it was also a clear line between us, the Bitcoin community. I mean, you said we back then. It was a clear line between us and them. Absolutely clearly distinguishable. On our side, we are the guys for freedom of transaction, and they are the guys for oppression and eternal enslavement of humankind. You could even see that in clothing. It was like uniform, you know, we wear the black hoodies and you wear the suits. It's so easy, we can separate each other. A bit like what picture that comes to my mind is that movie with Mel Gibson. I don't recommend that movie, but it's about how the Picts defend Caledonia, which is now Scotland, against the Roman invasion. Do you guys, I'm picking this movie because most people have seen it. I hope you have seen it, but you have these clear lines, like in all these movies. You know, on the one side, there's the Roman army, and you can see the Romans in their uniforms and their armor, and on the other sides is the Picts, all have their faces painted in blue. You can clearly distinguish all that, literally with uniforms. Now, this is 5-6 years later. We are today, and things have changed because they have started to understand, which makes sense because they have a lot of money to pay people. I said before, it's these 3 topics you need to understand, so you can find people who understand 2 of them, and after a couple of years they will have learned and gotten an understanding of the 3rd topic that was missing. So clearly today I can say they have started to understand, and that's bad news on one side and it's good news on the other side. It's bad news because since they understood, they will fight. We have seen nothing yet in terms of regulations and government actions against Bitcoin or the wider crypto economy. Freedom of transaction is supposed to be taken away from us. You may have heard of what is called the war on cash. There's a reason for this war on cash. War on cash stands for the phenomenon that governments around the world would love to abolish paper notes and coins, and steer us into a world where we entirely use digital means to transact their fiat money. The reasons for that is quite obvious. On one hand, our fiat financial system is pretty much at the brink of collapse. I strongly believe it would have already collapsed if they would not have come up with really crazy ideas like negative interest rates. I mean, this is literally the first time in 5,000 years that we've seen negative interest rates and stuff like that. And in order to keep that system running, it is important to take cash away from people. In regards to the negative interest rates, it's very easy. They calculated that if you have more than 5% negative interest rates, people will start going to the bank, withdraw their money, and put it under their mattress. So you have not the zero lower bound, as it was always called, like you can go down to 0%. Now they understood we can go to minus 0.5%, but the really important Bernankes and Rogoffs and other economists today say we will most likely have to go into 5 to 6% negative interest rates at some time in the future in order to keep that whole system running. This is entirely impossible if people have access to cash money. Same counts for bank bail-ins. Every jurisdiction nowadays has made laws that when the next banking crisis comes and the banks need a lot of money, it's not going to be the taxpayer who pays for whatever their losses and their speculation. It's going to be the people who have deposited money into that bank. Now, if you see the customers of some bank getting their money taken away because, let's say, the Dresdner Bank, a German bank, made some big mis-speculation, needs a lot of money, and their customers are getting their accounts plundered, and you are with Deutsche Bank, of course, what you're going to do is you're going to go and take your cash out there. So the war on cash is motivated literally by the most important things that our establishment wants to achieve. There's other aspects, like for government, if they can track every chewing gum that you buy, that's of course a great addition to their whole surveillance state. And for banks, it's also a great story because they can take a tiny cut from every coffee you buy everywhere if you do it only by digital means. So what you have there is banks and governments, financial institutions and financial regulators all pulling on the same rope. Then you know the war on cash is a real thing. That's the bad news, which is based on the fact that they have started to understand. They have started to understand that they may take that if they take our cash money away, they'd actually boost Bitcoin adoption, because people will try to find alternatives to replace the freedom they have with cash money. They have started to understand, but that's also good news. Because, let me turn this around. The smart people I met amongst bankers, central bankers, government members, law enforcement officers, who are somehow in their job responsible for doing something with Bitcoin, understanding Bitcoin, those are the ones who actually understood it. And in quite a few talks with these people, I found out, wow, that person holds Bitcoin themselves. Like, you talk to a financial regulator, and after a while, he drops a line, and you go, oh, you do have Bitcoin. And the financial regulator turns around and goes like, of course I have Bitcoin, I'm not stupid. So I have a quote here. Unfortunately, I forgot the name of the journalist lady. from some American radio station. And she once told me it's impossible to find someone who is against Bitcoin and who has actually understood it. I've been trying for 6 months now to find such a person. The point here being a person working in an organization that is threatened by the promise of Bitcoin. That person at the same time is an individual, and when that individual understands what the trend is here and what is happening, these people understand that they can at the same time work for an organization that's trying to regulate the shit out of Bitcoin to get it out of the way, but that they can at the same time anonymously hold it. So what we have here, how did I phrase it? Hold on. Bitcoin is literally infiltrating the organizations it is about, or it is planning to take out. And I find this is a very, very sympathetic thing about Bitcoin. There's beautiful examples about this. Maybe you read last year, some system administrator literally at the data center of the Federal Reserve was caught mining Bitcoin with the machines of the Federal Reserve. Another nice example is Chinese officials. A lot of things are a lot easier in China with a bribe to the official, but corruption is a crime in China. There's really harsh punishment for it, and they don't always try to apply a due legal process to bring you to court. It's literally enough in China when you're an official to have a lot of money, more money than you are obviously making in wages or something. That already, if you cannot explain where that money comes from, you can already go to jail. Now, in the past, what the Chinese had a great trick to work around this, and that was a certain stamp, which was a collector's item, an old Chinese stamp, rare enough to be very expensive, but with still enough of those things in circulation that you could actually use it. So you would bribe an official with one of these stamps, and then the guy could officially sell that stamp and get the money into his bank account. And if the government would turn around and go like, hey, where have you got that money from? He would go like, look, we found this stamp in my grandfather's drawer who just died, and he had had it for 50 years. The government cannot prove the opposite. Anyway, nowadays it's a great thing in China. If you want to bribe some official, just give them a Bitcoin wallet with a private key with some Bitcoin in there that have not been moved for the last, say, 6 years or something, and the official can just sell that stuff. And if anybody turns around and comes around and goes like, hey, where's that money from? You can go, hey, I mined these Bitcoins 6 years ago, and you cannot prove the opposite, but I'm talking too much about this. So what we can expect now is organizations that are fighting our movement, that are fighting Bitcoin, while at the same time the individuals in these organizations have a really high incentive to make those organizations lose that fight. I think that is I mean, people talk about the game theoretic and incentive structures of Bitcoin, which are pretty brilliant, but I think this is one of the most brilliant points, actually. So, obviously, we infiltrate the enemy through the enemy lines. Some people with blue faces have gone behind the lines of the Roman army to stick to that picture I brought before. Infiltration is the word here. Infiltration, by the way, can we do a little game? Is everybody listening? Do me a favor, each of you, please turn around and look into somebody's face. Come on, let's do that. Just look into, pick anybody, look into their face. Thank you very much. Now, how many people are in this room? What do you guess? Let's say 100. Let's say 100. I guarantee you that at least 5 of you 20 seconds ago looked into the face of an undercover 3-letter agency person. Welcome. So, look, guys, I'm not making this up. I'm coming from Germany, and we have an unbelievable history. What kind of organizations are being infiltrated by the government, you wouldn't just absolutely not believe. So it is pretty clear we have these people here. So infiltration from us behind, over the enemy lines towards them, but also infiltration from there. But this infiltration here, let's say we have some secret agents here, is not really the topic. I mean, what they are going to try to do is motivate you to do something illegal, something radical. We have that in Germany, where, for example, the left students' organizations are being infiltrated by government spies, and it's usually the government spies who try to, tell everybody we need to be more radical, we need to light up cars. They even import English cops to Berlin to go into these groups and light up cars, because they have to use English cops for that, because the German cop is not allowed by law to do something criminal there, so he cannot light up the car, but the English cops, and so the English government borrows German cops to do illegal stuff in England and the other way around. Anyway, so, but this is actually not the big threat. There is another kind of infiltration coming from the other side of the enemy line, and that is regulated companies trying to establish themselves as custodians of your money and as middlemen for your transactions. You have to imagine that Bitcoin literally was invented to circumvent custodians and middlemen. If Bitcoin has any point whatsoever, that's the point. Decentralization, permissionlessness, and so on, are a means to an end, are not the end. They are a means to an end, and that end is to get rid of custodians and middlemen. Now, there are some examples of custodians like coming from the outside, like all this ETF nonsense. Sorry. Which is supposed to open Bitcoin for institutional investors and so on, which of course entirely defeat Bitcoin's actual purpose. But that's not only coming from the outside. The craziest thing are actual Bitcoin companies that have been with us from 2011, maybe earlier, latest 2012. Custodians, Coinbase. I mean, Coinbase has millions of customers, millions of people who keep their Bitcoin on Coinbase's website. Coinbase is literally a bank, and I find it really crazy that we invent this beautiful digital bearer asset that nobody needs a bank to hold for, and what do people do with it? They bring it to a bank. That's custodian. Middlemen for transactions, look at BitPay. I mean, what is that stuff about? I'm going to a website and I want to pay in Bitcoin, and I get this even really pretty incompatible payment protocol, QR code displayed. I have to use a certain wallet, and so on and so on and so on. Instead of just being able to pay straight to the merchant I want to buy something from. I am lacking the words to say how bad I actually think this situation is. Let's just stick to Coinbase and BitPay. Both are corporations, and this is the really important takeaway when looking at them. Both are corporations, and they're not the only one, but both are corporations that have a business plan that is obsolete when Bitcoin fulfills its promise. I mean, you have to let that sink in. Coinbase is a multi-billion company. I don't know what BitPay is worth, but they literally, there will literally no point for them existing if Bitcoin gets adopted peer-to-peer and fulfills its promise. You cannot even blame their CEOs, or one step back. For me, that clearly means that they have no interest in Bitcoin succeeding the way Bitcoin was planned to succeed. There is nothing more obvious than that, I believe, in the Bitcoin economy, than that these actors are people who have a natural interest to work against Bitcoin functioning. And when you look at what they do, I don't know if the Segwit2x fork means something to everybody here. The difference between, or the pressure of centralization that big blocks bring with them, Coinbase and BitPay will always be on that side of an argument in the Bitcoin community that leads to more centralization. So I literally see these corporations as the biggest threat to Bitcoin. Coming to an end already, actually, with one conclusion. There is no us and them anymore. The enemy lines have completely and entirely blurred. And if I want to come back to the picture of the Mel Gibson movie from before, check that. It's like the Roman army and the Picts, and they're running towards each other, you know, like in these movies, and then everything's mingling, and you all just see people fighting, total chaos, absolute chaos. But the chaos is getting even bigger here, because all of a sudden you see a guy in a Roman uniform with a blue face. And stuff like that. So the conclusion about enemy lines is we have no us and them anymore. It's completely blurred. And the question is, how can we find some orientation? How do I look into, how do I find out if somebody I meet and talk Bitcoin is actually on my side, or is on the side that would like to prevent Bitcoin to succeed? And taking the metaphor of the battlefield, you will, in between all this chaos, sometimes see a guy waving a banner that says freedom of transaction, and his battle cry will be permissionless decentralization. And this is the group of people that I would be joining in such a battle. So at whatever you look in this whole exploding crypto economy, in Bitcoin, in the ICO madness and so on, the only thing that really matters is that thing or that person standing for complete decentralization and complete permissionlessness or not. And if they are most probably on your side of that enemy line. Thanks, and that is actually all I had to say. Thank you.
Okay, guys, any questions?
No, that was the
clear... here's one.
Okay, the part about Bitcoin companies being worse than governments doesn't seem to make sense, because I agree that both of them have some incentives for Bitcoin not to succeed. But what you've said about the governments, that they already have Bitcoins, so they have also incentives for Bitcoin to succeed. This is orders of magnitude more true for the Bitcoin companies. They have a lot of Bitcoins, so naturally they have also an incentive for Bitcoin to succeed. Plus, what they do is actually helping Bitcoin to succeed, as opposed to governments.
Who? Coinbase and BitPay?
Yes, they're providing some services that spread the Bitcoin adoption. If they were not providing these services, some other company would do it because there's just market demand for it.
Okay,
So,
let me clarify a few things. I didn't say governments have Bitcoin. I said individuals in organizations, also in governments, hold Bitcoin. It's an entirely different thing. And I wouldn't say Coinbase and BitPay are worse or more evil or anything like that. But they are much more efficient in turning Bitcoin around and steering it into a way that was actually not the original intention of Bitcoin. And you're saying, pooh, they're doing something for adoption, they're onboarding so many new customers. Here is where I literally don't care, because this is the point where I say mass adoption my ass. Because Bitcoin so far absolutely fulfills its promise for me personally and for everybody who wants to have that. Bitcoin is my personal financial sovereignty. Because I can send money to whoever I want. I can hold money that cannot be inflated away, or its value cannot be inflated away. It cannot be confiscated. It cannot be bank bailed in. It cannot be subject to negative interest rates. So I and everybody who wants to can already have financial sovereignty. Give me your answer on that in a second. And if there's people out there who don't have a kind of urge to have that financial sovereignty for themselves, and that's literally everybody who keeps their coins on Coinbase, then I don't quite care about these people. I would rather see a dead slow adoption of Bitcoin over the next, I don't know how many decades, by people who want to have financial sovereignty, instead of having an explosive growth and all of a sudden boarding on 1 billion people who all keep their coins in some kind of custodian wallet with Coinbase or somebody else, who take over their voting rights and so on and so on. And so, yeah, that's my take on that. You say I cannot, you shook your head when I said I and everybody else can already have their financial freedom. Why do you think this is not the case? This gentleman needs a microphone, please.
Okay.
It's not the case because the price needs to be at a certain value, like the liquidity needs to be at a certain value for a lot of people to be able to use it. As long as, just a few anarchists use it, then it's okay. You don't need the liquidity, you don't need that many services.
But it's already a lot more people than a few anarchists.
Yeah, but most of those other people use these centralized services, for now at least. So in this transitional period, they provide a very, very useful service. Maybe later, you're right, they won't be that useful, but for now, they just provide the ecosystem for this to work.
No, they don't provide an ecosystem for that to work that Bitcoin is supposed to be. They are literally banks. And the more people they bring on board, the more clueless people who want to somehow join Bitcoin because you can make so much money with it, or want to join Bitcoin because it's just such a cool thing, like your latest technology gadget, I want to have it. And these people get used to using a digital bearer asset in the same way as they used fiat money. That's not the future I envision. That's not the future I imagine. So I'd rather have a much lower Bitcoin exchange rate, whatever. You're absolutely right with volatility, but volatility will flatten out. I have no doubt about that with more people coming on board. Anyway, to cut it short, I would rather see people not adopt Bitcoin when they use it with custodians and middlemen and so on. I would rather them not ever hear about it until they need it, because this is the point where everybody will open their eyes and go like, shit, I should have gone for Bitcoin, and I should have kept my own keys and not put my Bitcoin into a bank. That moment will come when the bank bail-in comes, when the negative interest rates come, when stuff like that comes. Anyway.
Okay, I see we have other questions.
Thank you. Regarding your last sentence that we should see what people say, and if they are pro-decentralization, they support trustlessness, permissionlessness, that's fine. But we have another kind of story. There is a Coinbase part of the story, it's one part, and the second part is Bcash. And Roger Ver is as a perfect libertarian in his speech and a nice public speaker, but still what he does is going in opposite direction. And you didn't mention that, so what's your opinion on this topic?
Well, I think that Bcash is such a joke that it shouldn't be a topic in the first place. You are absolutely right that I said, look at their battle cry, look at what they're saying. You're absolutely right that I should have said, look at what they're doing. What's the line in the Bible? You will recognize them according to their deeds, or something like that. You are absolutely right on that. And that's why you are also right in regards to Bcash and Roger, because Bcash is a centralized, Nick Szabo said, centralized sock puppetry. It's a corporate coin issued by Bitmain under pretty much total control. They can hard fork like this because somebody gives out a decree, we are going to fork next week, everybody follow, and so on. You're absolutely right. I don't want to talk too much about Bcash, but yes, you are right. We need to look at what people are doing, not what they are saying. And this is a mistake that I made at the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? I see you both.
So regarding the custodians and all this nonsense, is like why do they even exist? I'm not sure how to place the those who offer like escrow services. For instance, if you order something, right, and maybe you don't want to send it directly if you want it delivered, right? So are they useful third party, or like how to?
Are escrow services useful, or what is your question?
Yeah, I mean, sort of escrow services are custodians, but kind of do they make sense?
Yes, they make sense, I guess, because we can have a escrow services are literally consumer protection built on top of Bitcoin, which has no consumer protection. Consumer protection is one of the most used arguments by financial regulators and governments, by the way, that they go like, there is no consumer protection. We have to protect the consumers here. We have to be able to reverse transactions. And I turn around and go like, no, the consumer protection for me as a consumer is that you cannot reverse the transaction, you know. But that's me personally, but there's people who want to have consumer protection. That means that you send money to a merchant. How do you make sure that he actually sends you the goods, or if the goods are broken, how do you get your money back? But this is something we can build on top of Bitcoin, which is no problem as long as we leave the base layer untouched. And I think these services, yeah, are very valuable, and I don't see them as a threat. Because in the first place, everybody here in the room can become an escrow service without having to ask the government for permission. All you need to do is behave and not steal people's money, ramp up your reputation. The better your reputation, the more people will use it. Now, I don't see escrow services as any threat whatsoever, and they are valuable services.
We have one more question in here.
Please.
Hello, it's not a question. I just wanted to clarify that you say that government has no coins. So if you try to find information about Bulgaria, that Bulgaria have more than 1% of total supply Bitcoins right now. So I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, I read about that example. Thanks for that. But I think that's the only example so far. So I think we can easily say governments and central banks do not yet hold Bitcoin as reserves, with one exception that proves the rule, however. Any more questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, I've been wondering how is it that the non-mining nodes, how do they help decentralization?
My non-mining node decentralizes me only because I run a full node. I can verify the rules the miner has been following who mined a block. If I don't have my own full node running to verify the rules, people think, or many people think a full node, or the whole don't trust verify thing, it means that you verify the transactions yourself. That's only one part. The actually, I believe, more important part is that with my own full node, I am capable to verify the rules that the miner is following who created the block that I'm being sent to. And that's why I'm decentralized. Like, if you come back to the example of Bcash, who are blowing up their block size in a way that makes it impossible for an individual at home to run a fully validating node. Then that means the miners can change the rules of the network protocol to their will, and you use an SPV client that only follows the longest chain, the chain with the most hash power built into it. And your SPV node, your light client, whatever you use there, cannot verify what rules are being followed on that chain. And that is the actual important thing. And that is what leads to decentralization.
Very interesting talk. Thank you. I think your critique of the centralized intermediaries in the industry is appropriate for the merchants and people here in Bitcoin who may have used those services in the past or are interested in getting actively involved in the economy. what kinds of software or apps, services would you recommend to them to be active participants in the economy while maintaining their self-sovereignty? Are there any specific tools that you endorse or recommend?
Literally any software that allows you to hold your own keys and to validate the rules the network is following. You want to hear specific names? I wouldn't know where to start, and I could not include them all. Electrum, Bitcoin Core Client, and so on. That's the kind of software that allows you to hold your own keys and that allows you to validate the rules of the protocol you're following.
Okay, guys, we have time for one last question, but nothing's after this speech here in Studio One, so I think you can discuss your ideas later with Joerg. But if any of you would like to ask right now, one last question.
Okay.
I see two, you already had your word, so I will ask these
That's
guys.
a professional moderator here.
Yeah, just to answer to the other question, that one name, what you can look into as a merchant would be, for example, BTC Pay Server, which is basically an open source software which is similar to BitPay. And my question to you, as we're talking about Coinbase and services like this, is there a difference if you have, for example, if you use the vault where you have like multi-signature and kind of your coins are not completely custodial with the service, but to some degree you still have somewhat of saying how your coins move or not move, to some degree, because it's similar to, let's say, how BitGo offers their service, or Green Address, for example.
Well, I think in these scenarios, yes, the custodian cannot run off with your money or put negative interest rates on it, but no, you cannot validate the network rules. It's that easy. And we're seeing that it is really important that users validate the network rules and make their choice. That is why we did not get S2X. If you'd have your people, if you have people holding their money with a custodian service, even if they hold their own keys, they cannot reject a block that follows other rules than they want the Bitcoin network to follow, and that's the problem here. Anyway, I think that was it. I thank you very much for listening to me, and have fun in this beautiful city and on this, in my opinion, greatest content. Thanks. Have fun.
Thank you very much, Joerg, for your nice words.